Continuing and probably concluding a double-barreled detective story by Mark Twain. Indeed, this is interesting. This is very interesting. Perhaps you encountered the assassin. No, I encountered no one. Ah, then if you will excuse the remark, I do not quite see the relevancy of the information. It has none at present. I say it has none at present. He paused. Presently he resumed. I did not encounter the assassin, but I am on his track, I am sure. 4. I believe he is in this room. I will ask you all to pass, one by one, in front of me here, where there is a good light, so that I can see your feet. A buzz of excitement swept the place, and the march began, the guest looking on with an iron attempt at gravity, which was not an unqualified success. Stillman stooped, shaded his eyes with his hand, and gazed down intently at each pair of feet as it passed. 50 men tramped monotonously by, with no result. 60, 70. The thing was beginning to look absurd. The guest remarked, with suave irony, "Assassins appear to be scarce this evening." The house saw the humor of it, and refreshed itself with a cordial laugh. 10 or 12 more candidates tramped by, no, danced by, with airy and ridiculous capers, which convulsed the spectators. Then suddenly Stillman put out his hand and said, "This is the assassin, Fetlock Jones." "By the great Sanhedrim," roared the crowd. Why would they say by the great Sanhedrim? Because eam is the usual plural of Aramea, but it's whether Sanhedrin or Sanhedrim, it's still a strange phrase to utter. At once let fly a pyrotechnic explosion and dazzle and confusion of stirred remarks, inspired by the situation. At the height of the turmoil, the guest stretched out his hands, commanding peace. The authority of a great name and a great personality laid its mysterious compulsion upon the house, and it obeyed. Out of the panting calm which succeeded, the guest spoke, saying with dignity and feeling, "This is serious. It strikes at an innocent life, innocent beyond suspicion, innocent beyond peradventure. Hear me prove it. Observe how simple a fact can brush out of existence this witless lie. Listen, my friends, that lad was never out of my sight yesterday evening at any time." It made a deep impression. Men turned their eyes upon Stillman with grave inquiry in them. His face brightened, and he said, "I knew there was another one." He stepped briskly to the table and glanced at the guest's feet, then up at his face and said, "You were with him. You were not 50 steps from him when he lit the candle that by and by fired the powder." Sensation. "And what is more, you furnished the matches yourself." Plainly the guest seemed hit. It looked so to the public. He opened his mouth to speak. The words did not come freely. This is insanity, this..." Stillman pressed his evident advantage home. He held up a charred match. "Here's one of them. I found it in the barrel. And here's another one, there." The guest found his voice at once. "Yes? And put them there yourself?" "It was recognized, a good shot." Stillman retorted, "It was a breed unknown to this camp." "I'm ready to be searched for the box. Are you?" The guest was staggered this time. The dullest eye could see it. He fumbled with his hands once or twice, his lips moved, but his words did not come. The house waited and watched, intense suspense, the stillness adding effect to the situation. Presently Stillman said gently, "We are waiting for your decision." There was silence again during several moments, and then the guest answered in a low voice, "I refuse to be searched." There was no noisy demonstration, but all about the house, one voice after another muttered it. "That settles it. He's Archie's meat." Well, often people aren't really accomplices, and they're like, right there. They don't know. What to do now? Nobody seemed to know. It was an embarrassing situation for the moment, merely, of course, because matters had taken such a sudden and unexpected turn that these unpracticed minds were not prepared for it, and had come to a standstill like a stopped clock under the shock. But after a little, the machinery began to work again, tentatively, and by twos and threes the men put their heads together and privately buzzed over this and that and the other proposition. One of these propositions met with such favor it was to confer upon the assassin a vote of thanks for removing Flint Buckner and let him go. But the cooler heads opposed it, pointing out that addled brains in the eastern states would pronounce it a scandal and make no end of foolish noise about it. Finally, the cool heads got the upper hand and obtained general consent to a proposition of their own. Their leader then called the House in order and stated it to this effect, that Fetlock Jones be jailed and put upon trial. The motion was carried. Apparently, there was nothing further to do now, and the people were glad, for privately they were impatient to get out and rush to the scene of the tragedy and see whether that barrel and the other things were really there or not. But no, the breakup got a check. The surprises were not yet over. For a while, Fetlock Jones had been silently sobbing, unnoticed in the absorbing excitements which had been following one another so persistently for some time. But when his arrest and trial were decreed, he broke out despairingly and said, "No, it's no use. I don't want any jail. I don't want any trial. I've had all the hard luck I want, and all the miseries. Hang me now, and let me out. It would all come out anyway. There couldn't anything save me. He has told it all just as if he'd been with me and seen it. I don't know how he found out. And you'll find the barrel and things, and then I wouldn't have any chance anymore. I killed him, and you'd have done it too, if he'd treated you like a dog. And you only a boy, and weak and poor, and not a friend to help you. And served him damn well. Broken hand sandwich. Looky here, boys." From the constable, "Order, order, gentlemen." A voice, "Did your uncle know what you was up to?" "No, he didn't." "Did you give the matches?" "Sure enough." "Yes, he did. But he didn't know what I wanted them for. When you was out on such a business as that, how long did you venture to risk having him along, and have him detective? How's that?" The boy hesitated, fumbled with his buttons in an embarrassed way, then said shyly, "I know about detectives on account of having them in the family, and if you don't want them to find out about a thing, it's best to have them around when you do it." A cyclone of laughter, which greeted this naive discharge of wisdom, did not modify the poor little waif's embarrassment in any large degree. And, well, it's not reliable, so don't think you're going to get away with something because the victim is deserving. But even in this day, police will throw away footage. Guards will turn off cameras. Crowds will say, "Oh, well, they deserved it." But so don't think modern technology has stopped, vigilante or other sort of, stuff when, the state, it should be the state that takes care of it, right? And was that really a deserving case, or was it, I think that something like that could have been dealt with less of a response, right? But Chapter 9, from a letter to Mrs. Stillman dated merely Tuesday. Fetlock Jones was put under lock and key in an unoccupied log cabin and left there to wait his trial. Constable Harris provided him with a couple of days' rations, instructed him to keep a good guard over himself, and promised to look in on him as soon as further supplies should be due. Next morning, a score of us went with Hillier out of Friendship and helped him bury his late relative, the unlamented Buckner, and I acted as first assistant pallbearer, Hillier acting as chief. Just as we'd finished our labors, a ragged and melancholy stranger, carrying an old handbag, limped by with his head down, and I caught the scent I'd chased around the globe. It was the odor of paradise to my perishing hope. In a moment, I was at his side, and he had laid a gentle hand upon his shoulder. He slumped to the ground as if a stroke of lightning had withered him in his tracks, and as the boys came running, he struggled to his knees and put up his pleading hands to me, and out of his chattering jaws he begged me to persecute him no more, and said, "You have hunted me around the world, Sherlock Holmes. Yet God is my witness. I have never done any man any harm." I glanced at his wild eyes, showed us that he was insane. "That was my work, Mother. The tidings of your death can some day repeat the misery I felt in that moment, but nothing else can ever do it." The boys lifted him up and gathered about him, and were full of pity of him, and said the gentlest and touchingest things to him, and said, "Cheer up, and don't be troubled." He was among friends now, and they would take care of him and protect him, and hang any man that laid a hand on him. They are just like so many mothers. The rough mining camp boys are, when you wake up, the south side of their hearts, yes, and just like so many reckless and unreasoning children, when you wake up the opposite of that muscle. They did everything they could think of to comfort him, but nothing succeeded until Wells Fargo Ferguson, who is a clever strategist, said, "If it's only Sherlock Holmes that's troubling you, you needn't worry any more." "Why?" asked the forlorn lunatic eagerly. "Because he's dead now." "Dead? Dead? Oh, don't trifle with a poor wreck like me. Is he dead?" "On honor now. Is he telling me true, boys?" "True as you're standing there," said Ham Sandwich, and they all backed up the statement in a body. "They hung him in San Bernardino last week," added Ferguson, clinching the matter, "whilst he was searching around for you. Mistook him for another man. They're sorry, but they can't help it now. They're building him a monument," said Ham Sandwich, with the air of a person who had contributed to it, and knew. James Walker drew a deep sigh, evidently a sigh of relief, and said nothing, but his eyes lost something of their wildness. His countenance cleared visibly, and its drawn look relaxed a little. We all went to our cabin, and the boys cooked him the best dinner the camp could furnish the materials for, and while they were about it, Hillier and I outfitted him from hat to shoe leather with new clothes of ours, and made a comely and presentable old gentleman of him. Old is the right word, and a pity too, old by the droop of him, and the frost upon his hair, and the marks which sorrow and distress have left upon his face, though he is only in his prime in the matter of years. While he ate, we smoked and chatted, and when he was finishing, he found his voice at last, and of his own accord broke out with his personal history. I cannot furnish his exact words, but I will come as near as I can. The wrong man's story. It happened like this. I was in Denver. I'd been there many years. Sometimes I don't remember how many. Sometimes I don't. But it isn't any matter. All of a sudden, I got a notice to leave, or I would be exposed for a horrible crime committed. long before, years and years before, in the East. I knew about that crime, but I was not the criminal. It was a cousin of mine to the same name. What should I better do? My head was all disordered by fear, and I didn't know. I was allowed very little time, only one day, I think it was. I would be ruined if I was published, and the people would lynch me, and not believe what I said. Most lynchings were of white people, by the way. When they found out it is a mistake, they're too sorry, but it's late, the same as it was with Mr. Holmes, you see. So I said I would sell out and get money to live on and run away until it blew over, and I could come back with proofs. Then I escaped in the night and went a long way off in the mountains somewhere and lived disguised and had a false name. I got more and more troubled and worried, and my troubles made me see spirits and hear voices, and I could not think straight and clear on any subject, but got confused and involved and had to give it up because my head hurt so. It got to be worse and worse, more spirits and more voices. They were about me all the time, at first, only in the night, then in the day too. They were always whispering around my bed, plotting against me, and it broke my sleep and kept me fagged out because I got no good rest. Well, fag used to be what they called a freshman, or some sort of murderable or something like this. That it doesn't mean what it means now. And then came the worst. One night the whispers said, "We'll never manage because we can't see him, and so can't point him out to the people." They sighed. Then one said, "We must bring Sherlock Holmes. He can be here in 12 days. They all agreed and whispered and gibbered with joy. But my heart broke, for I had read about that man, and knew what it would be to have him upon my track, with his superhuman penetration and tireless energies. The spirits went away to fetch him, and I got up at once in the middle of the night, and fled away carrying nothing but the handbag that had my money in it. $30,000, 2/3 of it are in the bag there yet. It was 40 days before that man cut up on my track. I just escaped. From habit, he had written his real name on a tavern register, but had scratched it out and written Daggett Barclay in the place of it. But fear gives you a watchful eye and keen. I read the true name through the scratches, and fled like a deer. He has hunted me all over the world for 3 years and a half. The Pacific states, Australasia, India, everywhere you can think of. Then back to Mexico, and up to California again, giving me hardly any rest. Oh, I forgot, it's Mexico, right? But that name on the register always saved me, and what's left of me is alive yet, and I am so tired, a cruel time he has given me. Yet, I give you my honor, I have never harmed him nor any man. That was the end of the story, and it stirred those boys to blood heat. Be sure of it. As for me, each word burned a hole in me where it struck. We voted that the old man should bunk with us, and be my guest and Hilliard's. I shall keep my own counsel, naturally, but as soon as he is well rested and nourished, I shall take him to Denver and rehabilitate his fortunes. The boys gave the old fellow the bone-smashing good fellowship handshake of the mines, and then scattered away to spread the news. At dawn the next morning, Wells Fargo Ferguson and Ham Sandwich called us softly out, and said privately, that news about the way the old stranger has been treated has spread all around from the camps are up. They are piling in from everywhere and are going to lynch the professor. Constable Harris is in a dead funk and has telephoned the sheriff. Come along. We started on a run. The others were privileged to feel as if they chose, but in my heart's privacy, I hoped the sheriff would arrive in time, and I had small desire that Sherlock Holmes should hang for my deeds. And, as you can easily believe, I had heard a good deal about the sheriff, but for reassurance's sake I asked, "Can he stop a mob? Can he stop a mob? Can Jack Fairfax stop a mob?" Well, I should smile. Ex-desperado. 19 scalps on his string. Can he? Oh, I say. And honestly, when a mob joins in to commit a crime, they should be tried for that crime. And a lot of the world, too, as much as 20 people get executed for one murder. So you think honor killing is something they get away with? No, it's not something they are. Mob killing, it's comes down quite hard. And it's a great deterrent, too, if the state actually executes criminals. As we tore up the gulch, distant cries and shouts and yells rose faintly on the still air and grew steadily in strength as we raced along. Roar after roar burst out, stronger and stronger, nearer and nearer, and at last, when we closed up upon the multitude massed in the open area in front of the tavern, the crash of sound was deafening. Some brutal roughs from Daly's Gorge had Holmes in their grip, and he was the calmest man there. A contemptuous smile played about his lips, and if any fear of death was in his brutish heart, his iron personality was master of it, and no sign of it was allowed to appear. "Come to a vote, men." This from one of the Daly gang. "Shadbelly Higgins. Quick. Is it hang or shoot?" "Neither," shouted one of his comrades. "He'd be alive again in a week. Burning's the only permanency for him." The gangs from all over the outlying camps burst out in a thunder crash of approval and went struggling and surging toward the prisoner and closed around him, shouting, "Fire! Fire's the ticket!" They dragged him to the horse post, backed him against it, chained him to it, and piled wood and pine cones around him, waist deep. Still the strong face did not blench, and still the scornful smile played about the thin lips. "A match! Fetch a match!" Shadbelly struck it, shaded it with his hand, stooped, and held it under a pine cone. A deep silence fell upon the mob. The cone caught, a tiny flame flickered about it. A moment or two, I seemed to catch the sound of distant hooves. It grew more distinct, still more and more distinct, more and more definite, but the absorbed crowd did not appear to notice it. The match went out. The man struck another, stooped, and again the flame rose. This time it took hold and began to spread. Here and there, men turned away their faces. The executioner stood with the charred match in his fingers, watching his work. The hoofbeats turned a projecting crag, and now they came thundering down upon us. Almost the next moment, there was a shout, "The sheriff!" And straightway came, tearing into the midst, stood his horse, almost on his hind feet, and said, "Fall back, you gutter snipes." He was obeyed by all but their leader. He stood his ground, and his hand went to his revolver. The sheriff covered him promptly and said, "Drop your hand, you parlor desperado. Kick the fire away. Now unchain the stranger." The parlor desperado obeyed. Then the sheriff made a speech, sitting his horse at martial ease, and not warming his words with any touch of fire, but delivering them in a measured and deliberate way, and in a tone which harmonized with their character, and made them impressively disrespectful. "You're a nice lot now, ain't you? Just about eligible to travel with this bilk here, Shadbelly Higgins, this loudmouth sneak that shoots people in the back, and calls himself a desperado. If there's anything I do particularly despise, it's a lynching mob. I've never seen one that had a man in it. It has to tally up 100 against 1 before it can pump pluck enough to tackle a sick tailor. It's made up of cowards, and so is the community that breeds it. And 99 times out of 100, the sheriff's another one." He paused, apparently to turn that last idea over in his mind and taste the juice of it. And then he went on, "The sheriff that lets a mob take a prisoner away from him is the lowest down coward there is. By the statistics, there was 182 of them drawing sneak pay in America last year. By the way it is going, pretty soon there'll be a new disease in the doctor books. Sheriff complaint. That's the idea. That idea pleased him. Anyone could see it. People will say, Sheriff sick again? Yes, he's got the same old thing. And next, there'll be a new title. People won't say he's running for sheriff of Rapo County, for instance. They'll say he's running for coward of Rapaho. Lord, the idea of a grown-up person being afraid of a lynch mob. He turned an eye on the captive and said, Stranger, who are you, and what have you been doing? My name is Sherlock Holmes, and I have not been doing anything. It was wonderful the impression which the sound of that name made on the sheriff. Notwithstanding, he must have come posted. He spoke up with feeling, and said it was a blot on the country that had a man whose marvelous exploits had filled the world with their fame and their ingenuity, and whose histories of them had won every reader's heart by the brilliancy and charm of their literary setting, should be visited under the stars and stripes by an outrage like this. He apologized in the name of the whole nation and made Holmes a most handsome bow, and told Constable Harris to see him to his quarters and hold himself personally responsible if he was molested again. Now, molested means bothered, but when it means the other thing, it's not fitting to allow to happen to a prisoner either, even a guilty one, because that stuff makes its way out of prison. If you need no other reason than that, that stuff makes its way out, including more brutality and killing of victims. Hunt your holes, you scum, which they did. Then he said, Follow me, Shadbelly. I'll take care of your case myself. No, keep your pop gun. Whenever I see the day that I'll be afraid to have you behind me with that thing, it'll be time for me to join last year's 182, and he rode off in a walk, Shadbelly following. When we were on our way back to our cabin toward breakfast time, we ran upon the news that Fetlock Jones had escaped from his lockup in the night and is gone. Nobody is sorry. Let his uncle track him out if he likes. It is in his line. The camp is not interested. Chapter 10. 10 days later, James Walker is all right in body now, and his mind shows improvement too. I start with him for Denver tomorrow morning. Next night. Brief note, mailed at a way station. As we were starting this morning, Hillier whispered to me, Keep this news from Walker until you think it safe, not likely to disturb his mind, and check his improvement. The ancient crime he spoke of was really committed, and by this cousin, as he said, we buried the real criminal the other day, the unhappiest man that has lived in a century, Flint Buckner. His real name was Jacob Fuller. There, mother, by help of me, an unwitting mourner, your husband, and my father is in his grave. Let him rest.